podcasting is basically a place where you can share your voice. The same podcaster can do very different shows, right? Like depending on what the feel is, depending on what the brief is, depending on what the brand is. Don't be restricted by it doesn't have to be a one-on-one fireside. I've had shows where people have reviewed rocks, right? Like literally as something as random as that.
Over 1.7 million podcasts are available online with an estimated of 2 billion podcast listeners. It's very clear that the podcast wave has taken the world by storm. More and more brands and companies are starting of tapping into this new media. But where exactly to start? I'm Anushka, and in this episode we'll talk all about podcasting, and we have with us Srivar. His podcast, Cost Company, which he wrote, hosted and produced, was selected as one of the top podcasts of 2022 by Apple Podcasts. He's also worked for JioSaavn, which is the platform which brought the podcasting wave to India. Welcome to the show, Srivar. So the very first question is, why should you even start a podcast, given that there are so many shows out there?
Yeah, Ishka, thank you for sort of getting me on board. I think, it is a perennial question as to why you should start podcasts, because again, the quantity is a lot. Like, there are many people who sort of want to start a podcast, but once you look at, let's say, people having an Instagram account, right? Like, you never look at them and say that, oh, why do you have an Instagram account? Podcasting is basically a place where you can, share your voice, right? It's a platform that allows you to share your voice, and there is quite a few benefits that you have, right? You can, of course, use it for personal branding, right? So personal branding is definitely one of the use cases where, you can use your podcast to sort of, brand yourself and really share your voice. For networking, right? You actually can use your podcast, whatever you're doing, to reach out to people who are usually outside of your network, right? And they're probably not somebody who's in your radar all the time, but you can reach out to them and have you on the show. But see, so far I've told you about stuff which is, in the individual style, in the conversation style, but this is for individuals. But for brands, right? Like, let's not forget that podcasts are also a great way for brands to really, tell their brand message in a long format. Because essentially what you see in social media is very short form content, right? Even the long form on short form on like social media is extremely it's extremely vapid and not, very wholesome. Podcasting is that one way which allows you to have a lot of depth, right? It's a depth medium. It's a depth first medium. Of course, you can have short clips as well, and you can have, short episodes as well. But I think for both brands and individuals, it's a great way to get your message across in an in-depth form and making sure that it seeps through to many activities, right? Like podcasting is great because which other activity can you do while driving, while doing your laundry, while walking? It seeps through the other parts, right? So these are called ultra moments where, it's essentially when you're looking at a screen, then you're tied to the screen. But once you have an audio platform, an audio medium, I think podcasting is a great way to reach those people. Again, not a lot of people, probably it won't be as much as video, but it's always a great way to, speak to a limited bunch, but with a lot of depth.
I think you've produced shows from both these categories as well. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. So let me start with like a brand show. Of course, there are more shows that I'm sort of show running and producing and writing currently, but the most popular perhaps is Cost Company, which is again a careers and workplaces podcast, which was by the Ken, which is a business journalism organization based out of Bangalore. And that was again, it's a publication, right? So brand publication, I'm using these two interchangeably here. And essentially Cost Company was a really successful podcast because it spoke about trends in the Indian workplace. And it was an interesting format as well because we used narrative, which was again, using your own sort of script, and you have to actually write out the episodes. And we had conversations as well. So that was for the Ken. And we actually were featured as one of Apple Podcast's top new shows of 2022, right? Along with some really big global giants. So really grateful for the Apple team to sort of, give us that honor last year. Hopefully this year as well, this is something that, the show will, gain more accolades and accrue a lot of love, which it has been getting. Coming to my own show, so this is like the branded show that I did. Like it was for the brand, for the publication, which was the Ken. Actually, also have my own show that's called That's What Shri Said, which is into pop culture and which is into, again, movies and music and a bit of street culture as well. I've just started that, in fact. So it's been around for about 5 years now, approximately 4.5 years, 5 years. And it was actually selected as one of JioSaavn's shows of the month in June, I think in 2021. Then it was also featured in the spotlight section by Ghana. So it has that sort of that following, which is again not a very cerebral, not a very cost to company like show, but it's very different, right? And I really want to highlight that fact that the same podcaster can do very different shows, right? Like depending on what the feel is, depending on what the brief is, depending on what the brand is, one podcaster can actually delve into many things, and one brand can have many different shows as well. So which other platform can you have of such a variety, such a mix of things, right? So you can, because it's so, it's not so difficult to produce, you can actually create a lot of stuff in many ways. So these two have been the shows that I've really dearly worked on, and they've done quite well. By God's grace.
That's great. I think once you understand if podcasting is something that you want to go ahead with, the very next question that I also get asked very often is that what's the equipment that I should invest in? And I know everybody has a different budget, but what would you suggest?
See, honestly, Anushka, like the basic thing that you can go for, pretty much like the way I started out as well back in 2018. I mean, I started recording in 2017, but I didn't release then. Was a phone, right? Like you just open the Anchor app and then you just have the phone that's there. But I would say as a good basic setup is a nice mic, probably like a dynamic mic that you have, which is like unidirectional. So for example, even this one, of course, it's slightly more expensive. The Shure MV7, it's a great investment, of course. But I would say the basic kit that you require, if you ask me honestly, is a laptop, headphones, and the mic, right? Like I think these are pretty much the standard kit that comes. So of course you can always upgrade later. You can always buy better and bigger things. But also it's interesting to note that while we speak about tools, we also have to speak about the platforms, right? Like we also have to speak about where you can host them. So I, of course, have used Anchor for my own podcast. Like that's been my biggest go-to destination for hosting the platform. But you can really see, you can try Buzzsprout as well. You can try Transistor. They have interesting features. They have the interesting, tidbits about, some things that they can do better than Anchor. Some things, Anchor is of course, now it's been labeled as Spotify for podcasters. But loads of platforms out there. And, you host your podcast here for free, mostly for free. And then it goes to all the other digital service providers or DSPs, so your Spotify's, your Apple Podcasts of the world. So it really distributes it there using the RSS technology. So yeah, you need a hosting platform which is very easy to find, whatever suits your liking, and you need a phone to get started out with. But of course, your audio quality does get better with better mics.
I think, yeah, so this is what a lot of people come up. So this is a question a lot of people have. Another thing that people struggle with is that, once they have an idea, they want to create a podcast, but they struggle with what are the elements? I mean, how frequently I'm going to produce it? What's the length going to be?
So I think, again, a very interesting question because it's so subjective, but also there are a few nice to haves here. So in terms of duration, Anushka, honestly, I've seen episodes, okay? I have not produced episodes which are 8 hours long, but I have seen episodes which are legitimately 8 hours long for like single episodes. I have Amit Verma does that. So that's obviously a very popular podcast as well, The Seen and the Unseen. But there are also shows which are into like audio logging, right? Like A-logs as we call them. So like 2-3 minutes, like an update, like a diary update of sorts. So length is honestly, duration or length is honestly depends a lot on what your style is, what your format is and whatnot, what your structure is. But I would say a nice to have is somewhere ranging in the mark of 15 to 30 minutes is what like a nice sweet spot is. And the reason why I say that is you should keep your episodes at least that long because, if people are clicking on it and probably they're driving, right, or probably they're going somewhere, it should be that I don't have to change episodes. Like, I say it like, it should... Basically, the time it takes you from when I was in Bangalore, I was like, okay, the way we describe cost to company as well is that the time it takes you to go from Indiranagar to Koramangala, that's the ideal length of a good podcast episode. In Bombay terms, it can be construed to I don't know, a Bandra to an Andheri, and in Delhi it can be like a Saket to Gurgaon on good days, of course. But that's basically what my estimate is, that like a 15 to 30 minutes is a nice spot to have. Of course, you can always decrease and go beyond that, but that depends. When you ask me about frequency, it again really depends on you. But usually, I would say when you're starting out, consistency has to be key. Consistency is anyway, it's one of the biggest tenets of podcasting. Like it'll be, I'd be remiss if I don't mention how important consistency is in the entire game, because you don't have too much else to play with. You don't have a video element where you're capturing them. Of course, they're video podcasts, but I'm not getting into that. But like, consistency is really key here. So when I say frequency, you should decide a frequency, but you should stick to it. So even if it's once a month, at least do it once a month. But at the same time, starting out, I would say that once a month is a bit too sparse. Like you're not that, well loved already, especially if you're starting out, of course, that you can go away with once a month. And because people, again, public life, like the memory cycle is very short, right? So you do keep on forgetting. You're like, oh yeah, Anushka had a show, of course, another episode. It's better if you have like every 2 weeks. Weekly, I know it can get very difficult. Honestly, it is a stressful job, especially if you have a full-time job, if you have something else to do. But I would say a good estimate, a good balance here would be twice a month. It's a good sweet spot.
I think another thing a lot of people, I myself have struggled with, is that, it's very difficult to find good guests for your show. And initially I used to struggle with it a lot, but then I understood how to approach them. So what's your way of approaching the guests to invite them on your show?
Yeah, no, again, important question, especially for those who do conversational or like one-on-one or fireside chats, which is of course the most popular format, not the only format of podcasts that exist, but definitely the most popular. And it's almost, you associate podcasts with the whole one-on-one guest sort of a thing. Right. But I would say, for me, what's really worked, Anushka, is LinkedIn itself, right? Like LinkedIn, just, having a nice introduction, and of course, having InMail, which is the LinkedIn premium feature, that also helps. And just approaching people as to, and having some amount of clarity. And see, you always have to play it on a way that, they are doing you a favor, which they are, right? Because you're essentially taking that time, and you're obviously not going to be paying them because they're just going to be a guest. So you have to make the deal sweet in a way that, you're, of course, you're not going to be like branding, you're not blowing that trumpet in that sense, but you have to make sure that, it's done in a very respectful way, that, hey, you know what, it'd be lovely to have you, and you also have to mention why we want you, right? I can't be like, hey, Shah Rukh, just come on. Why? Oh, because you're such a good actor, and because you've really changed how the Hindi movie industry has shaped culture and whatnot. So that's why we want you on the show, because we speak about Hindi film industry. So I think that reason to appear is also very important here, where you should tell people, I really want you because this. So the other person's also like, this person has done some research. There is some alignment. Like I don't want to call the chief minister of Maharashtra for a podcast on pop culture, right? Like it doesn't make sense. So I think having that positioning pretty much from the start helps. You can't out and out cold mail everyone. First, understand who you're really talking to. So LinkedIn really helps. That's how you had approached me as well, Anushka, for this podcast as well. And I think in general, LinkedIn is great. Instagram, I'm a bit wary of. It's a bit of a casual platform I've seen. So people are like, whatever. They don't take you very seriously on Instagram. It's always like a cool, and of course you have referrals and all as well. Referrals always help. That's a given. Twitter also helps, but it's just that it's not a very, not too many people use it and are familiar with the platform. There is a select bunch. But I would definitely go with LinkedIn first, and then Twitter comes through, and referrals and WhatsApp and whatnot. But yeah.
I think that was very insightful, Shrivar. Can we just, for our listeners out there, can we just conclude it very quickly on all the points we went through one by one? For sure.
No, absolutely. So I think consistency is damn important, like most forms of media, but especially here because you don't have too much else to play with. So you at least got to show up with your scripts. Don't be restricted by, it doesn't have to be a one-on-one fireside. I've had shows where people have reviewed rocks, right? Like literally as something as random as that, where people can review rocks and, okay, this is how it feels and whatnot. And so be crazy. The format really allows you to sort of play with a lot of, it can be conversational, it can be a narrative, it can be a review, an anecdotal thing, whatnot. So really go crazy with that. Use music effects and whatnot. You don't need much to start with it. Again, it's a lo-fi medium, as I like to call it. It's low fidelity. You don't need too much. You can start with a phone, but having a mic always helps. It's great for your personal brand, and for the brand, it's great for their, getting their message across and their brand pillars and their brand narrative, which you keep hearing about. What's the narrative of the brand? Use the podcast to, of course, don't out and out have like an ad throughout. Like the entire episode shouldn't be an ad, but it should actually play to your narrative, right? Which makes a lot of sense. And of course, I myself consult a lot of brands and a lot of international and national brands on how do they approach podcasts, and since I have done it, so it always helps getting that that perspective as well. Speaking to consultants, speaking to producers is always a great way to sort of get people on board. LinkedIn is a great way to approach people. And yeah, I think lastly, having fun. That's a very important thing. If you don't have fun with it, if you look at it as a chore, don't do it. I've been doing it for 5 years. It's still as fun as it was in 2018.
That's great. Thank you so much, Shivo, for coming on Top Connect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Top Connect. If you have any questions related to the episode, feel free to check out the links in the description below. As promised, here's your chance to win a one-on-one call with our guest. All you need to do is talk about the top 3 learnings that you got from this episode on any of your major social media platforms, and don't forget to tag Topmate. Also, if you're listening to this on Spotify, don't forget to check out the questions and the poll below. I'm your host Anushka, and you were listening to Top Connect, an educational podcast by Topmate, hosted and produced by me.